Shalimar. I'm excited to be here with you all. One of my favorite roles in life is mentor and coach. And so before I even knew specifically what Joanna wanted me to talk about, which then I would learn, I get to talk about whatever I want. I was like, ooh, a chance to mentor somebody or a group. That's exciting to me. And she's been telling me all about the different things that you've had. And you had Michelle, she's been with me for 10 years. She's worked as my director of behavioral health for 10 years. And so I'm glad she had a space in your mentorship program. And now here I am. And I always applaud any program that includes leadership development, because we can talk all day about specific outcomes and bottom lines. But if you're not talking about developing people, we're missing the mark. You got to pour into people if you want anything to get done, whatever space or field you're in. So I just applaud you all for being a part of this, and that there is leadership development included in this. Joanna, thank you so much. So I am just going to get started. And I want to let you know, I always say, the more energy you give me, the better a facilitator I am for you. Also, I have lots of slides, but I love dialogue. And so you don't have to wait till the end if you have a thought, especially in this one, because it's an intimate group. Feel free to just like raise your hand. And if I'm just going off because I'm so excited and somebody sees somebody's hand, just call me out and I'll pause right there. But yeah, feel free to jump in. Let's have some dialogue. And, if you do come off mute for any reason, which I'm going to go a little bit around, but make sure you introduce yourself and where you're from, because I love to get to know people. Connection is really important to me. So we're going to talk today about leading with impact. Let's see if I can, okay. I might tell you a little bit about me, because I know I'm just joining for the first time. I don't know any of you, which is exciting for me. So I do feel like I should center you with who is this person who's going to spend the next hour. So a little bit about myself. I was born in the Philippines. This picture on the right is actually me in the red overalls. I've never been good at goodbyes, and I'm still not. But on that day, it was July, some kind of year, 1979. I was leaving the Philippines. My whole family was, it was my mom and I. It's our turn to immigrate to Las Vegas, and we've been here ever since. I had an amazing, my hero, my late grandmother, was a female veteran in World War II. She was a Bronze Star recipient in the war, a highly decorated nurse for her heroic acts. And it was her nursing service that afforded us the opportunity to be able to immigrate to the US, because she was actually recruited when there was a nursing shortage here in America. And one by one, she brought the rest of us here. And so there was me, a 13-month-old baby. Now I just told you how old I am, but that's okay. 13-month-old, leaving the Philippines. And then to the left, the other girl in the picture is my daughter. She's 5, and she just had her first visit to the Philippines in January. I was taken to the Philippines. She had an amazing time. She also cried when she had to leave the Philippines from that trip. We just loved being there. Something else really integral to me, I love the Seattle Seahawks. I feel like I have to introduce myself with that. People's passions are important to me. I am so excited about the football season starting back up tonight. I love football. This is just some fun facts about me. My favorite movie is Aaron Brockovich. I say that's not always been the movie that I have named, but as I've come to learn myself and my values, that movie keeps coming up for me. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. It's my favorite movie. And then where I am now, which is relative to Elevating Nevada and housing, is I've worked here at US Vets, which is the largest nonprofit serving veterans experiencing homelessness and their families through housing, employment, and wraparound services since 2003. Now, normally I say I started when I was 13, but I just ruined that because earlier I just told you actually how old I was, if you were doing math. But I have worked here for 20 years, you guys. That's a long time to begin a place. I started in January of 2003. So my first job in this social work arena was outreach. That is me on the bottom there. We were doing a regional outreach event, and that was me talking to somebody who did not turn out to be a veteran, but we were connecting everybody to housing that's on the sidewalk in Las Vegas, downtown by the Hope Corridor. So it has been a fun 20 years. It is my passion to help people reach their full potential, like our clients, as well as our staff who serve our clients. It's my passion to try and end homelessness. I obviously shared with you that My hero in my life was my grandmother. Her husband, my grandfather, is also one of my heroes. He also was a World War II veteran. And so they were the first veterans in my life. I never knew that I would someday serve veterans myself. But now that they're not both with us, I like to think that I'm taking care of their fellow veterans, as they always felt was important as well, because our family has seen the effects of service and how that can affect someone's life, both positively and also with challenges throughout their lifetime. So that's a little bit who I am, and I'm excited to spend time with you, and excited that you all are involved in this. You know, our passion at US Vets is to really help end veteran homelessness, because we really believe that no one who has ever worn our country's uniform, who has stepped up and said yes to service, should find themselves sleeping on the very streets that they fought to defend. We think it's a national tragedy that our veterans would come home and find themselves experiencing homelessness or be at risk of homelessness, considering all they have done to serve and sacrifice for our country. So we are in the good fight to end veteran homelessness. Here's a little bit about our organization, because I think it's important for me to do that too, especially in this space. We were established September 8th, 2001. That was 3 days before the attacks on the World Trade Center and on America. Who knew that years later we would then house veterans who signed up to serve in what would become that war, Iraq and Afghanistan, and then transition out and become homeless. And so we opened right before 9/11. We've since expanded to 3 locations serving veterans specifically. And then just in February, we housed our first non-veteran client in the bottom left photo there, which is a old renovated vintage safari motel in Las Vegas. And the county actually asked us to replicate what we're doing for veterans to the non-veteran side, because we operate a transitional housing program where veterans, in our VIP program or Veterans in Progress program, veterans in transitional housing move out to permanent housing in an average of about 65 days with income to their own housing. And we've been doing that since 2001. And so the county realized that as we're reducing the number of veterans on the wait list for housing, veterans who are experiencing homelessness, the numbers of civilians waiting for housing actually gone up. And at that time, since that conversation, it's doubled actually to over 4,000 people in Clark County. So they asked us, would you be willing to teach us how you run your transitional housing program? I said, well, let me think about it. And I came back and I said, would you be willing to let us lead it with you? And so we said yes, and we opened what we call our Betterment Project. So in total, 4 locations in the Valley serving our population of individuals and some families who are experiencing homelessness right now. So that's about our organization. Now, what I am going to talk about for the rest of the time, though, is actually not specific to housing, but as you heard me say, it's specific to leadership and leadership growth and development, which is really important to me. And I have a favorite leadership book. It has changed my life ever since I read it in 2020, 2021, at the height of all the craziness of COVID. I was glad to read this book, and I did not know it would then turn into a movement that we're doing in our organization. But so anyway, I formulate a lot of leadership trainings based on how I was impacted by this book. And then Joanna goes and tells me, you are I was meant to be here. This is amazing. So now I want to ask you, because I have a friend, I've been a part of a book club with my best friend for many years. We read books together. And then I have another friend who, she used to work here, and she said, I joined a book club and it's in our neighborhood because she lives in mine. And I was like, you joined a book club? That's amazing. And then so she's like, we're meeting on Thursday for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, what are you guys to talk about? She's like, I have no idea. I did not read the book, but they're serving wine. And she said, are you readers down? I was like, she was like, oh, it'll be fine. Then I'll just be able to chime right in. So I'm just curious, did you all actually read the book? I hope so. But even if you didn't, we are going to talk about some of the things that were pertinent to us and our organization from this book. But we are going to dig in to something that I learned as inspired by this book and really how I've applied it to our organization and to my leadership. Okay, so that's where we're going with it. But before I go into the rest of my slides, I do kind of want to hear, and Joanna told me you guys actually haven't had a time yet to sort of process the book and the reading. So now you're on the spot, maybe. But this is the time where we get to interact. So introduce yourself to me, who you represent, as your organization, or however you want to introduce yourself, really. And we kind of want to hear about how the book was. Let me give you a prompt, like what was most useful for you when you read the book? Anybody can go first. Who will be the lucky one? Chico comes off mute.
I thought everyone was going to come off mute at the same time. I'm Chico Clark. I work for Oikos Development Corporation. We're an affordable housing nonprofit based out of Kansas City, Missouri. I've been in the industry for about 18 months. So as you all know, that means I haven't built anything yet, but I'm looking forward to getting our first bricks on the ground. We do currently have a development going on in Carson City, Nevada, and that is being built, our first two buildings from phase one. Ina helped put that together quite well. Was very important to that process, so I'm sure she's just as excited as I am to see it going on. The book, I found it was I thought it was going to be about leadership, but it turns out it was more about psychology, and managing your own emotions in a situation. I really found the sections breaking down the toolbox for dynamic leadership for a daring leadership versus that fear-based leadership. And while you see yourself doing a lot of probably a lot of both in any scenario, it's nice to see it broken down so that you can really hone in what is actually happening in real time in situations. So I found that to be the most useful.
Nice. Thanks, Chico, for sharing that. And yeah, she talked a lot about how leaders have to just be more courageous. Like we need more courageous leaders in the world. And what's funny, as much as I love leadership books, I'm always reading one. I always think they're going to teach me about like how I lead other people. I'm like, oh, you always feel like you want to teach me first about myself. You mean I get vulnerable first? Oh, good. Okay, fine. And Brene Brown did that to me too in this book, where I was like, I thought this was going to be like, you're going to give me a flow chart. Like, do this if this happens. And she's like, well, are you holding on to any shame or grief first? You want to bring me on? And what's funny? I ended up going to the Dare to Lead, an intensive 3-day workshop that was hosted by a licensed therapist. And same thing, I walk in there and I'm like, okay, so now you're going to teach me how to apply the book to the people that I lead. And in 45 minutes, I tell her all the time, we're good friends now. In 45 minutes, I was like up in front of the room crying, sharing all of my like childhood traumas. And I'm like, why can't you guys get me all down? But it was really good. The call to be courageous was a really good part of that book. I like that. Cool. Thanks, Chico. And I like he was giving Ina some snaps there. And I love your name. It's so beautiful with a double A. Can we go to you since you were named?
Yeah, I assumed it was my turn next. Hi, my name is Ina Sharma. I work with Praxis Consulting Group. I'm a senior project manager there. We do finance development consulting. I work with a lot of people on this call, actually, so it's great to see them in different ways. I've been in the industry since 2017, so it's been 5 years. I'm still learning a lot as new programs have come about. We're just stepping into some permanent supportive housing projects, so I was hoping that we would talk more about that piece of your work, but since we're talking more about leadership, I'll get into the book. I'm going to be honest, I didn't completely read the book.
That's okay.
It's just not my type of book. I would say I'm more of like, I like stories and want to sort of get away from the world sometimes.
Yeah.
But the little that I did read, I also found that it was interesting that it was more of a reflection on yourself rather than who you're leading. And I think that's important as I'm becoming more in a leadership role too, that I should see what qualities I have in myself that I want to bring out in others rather than just be pessimistic of they're making mistakes or just trying to be a helping hand, not, pushing people, but pushing myself as well.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We are actually going to talk a little bit about that, like how you connect with yourself and how you can bring out, what's best in yourself and therefore help people bring out what's best in them, even if maybe your values are not exactly the same. So that's a good segue to what we're going to cover today. So that little part you read will do it for us. That's good. That's a good segue. It's exciting for you to be in a cohort of people that you work with in your space. That's awesome. Thank you. Who wants to go next? I'm watching. Brandon, go for it. I felt
I'll
like I saw
go.
like a hand reaching for a mouse there. I was hoping.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry about my setup. I'm in the middle of packing and moving.
nice. Congrats.
So it's on my phone. Thanks. I'm moving back to Vegas. I'm up in Reno now, but I'm moving back to Vegas. That's where I'm from.
Ooh,
So I'm excited
nice.
about that.
Well, we're happy to
Um,
welcome you back, Brandon.
Thank you, thank you. I'm happy I just missed. It seems like I missed the hottest part of the year, so I'm
Oh my
really
God.
stoked about that.
Yeah, that was a good time to come.
But before my last day was actually on Tuesday. I was a housing case manager at Northern Nevada Hopes. We're a federally qualified health center in Reno. So I kind of split up between doing integrative case management with patients and exam rooms during provider visits, and then I had a targeted caseload. Individuals looking for housing resources, and then we did eviction prevention. So we had some certain funds like the ESGCV COVID grant, and then internal funds to help with, COVID related financial hardships, and then medically related financial hardships to keep people housed. And then I dabbled a little bit with the HOPWA and Ryan White Part B funding for our HIV patients as well. So that was my main focus.
Okay.
And when it comes to the book, I also didn't finish the whole thing, but
Okay.
and I missed our last book meeting last Friday because I was off and getting ready for the move. So sorry about that. But with Brene Brown, though, I am familiar with her work and the parts that I did read. You touched on it already, is the vulnerability piece. And every single effective, I would say effective leader that I have had above me, just the vulnerability, I felt like that was genuine within them.
Yeah.
And that willingness to make a connection and find out where you're at, where your strengths are, and where your weaknesses are, and be able to effectively communicate that and find those in you to make me want to be vulnerable and open up and figure out how I can grow. And I feel like it makes a huge difference for me when leaders have that piece and when they don't.
I love that we have focused so much here about vulnerability, and it's so interesting. So I also listen to her podcast. I mean, I am slightly obsessed with Dr. Brene Brown. I'm also trying to put it in the universe that someday I will be on her podcast. But anyway, so much so that when she does her leadership podcast, she always ends it with a rapid 10 questions of leadership. And the first one is, vulnerability is blank, fill in the blank. Okay, so here's where I geek out. Like, I have actually written down my answers to all 10 of her rapid questions. In the event she should call me with not much notice, I already know how I will answer the questions. Anyway, that first question, vulnerability is blank, I would say probably before I really dug into vulnerability, I used to think vulnerability was a weakness. Like, I can't show anybody how vulnerable I'm feeling as a leader right now because they will think I'm crumbling, and then they will not be able to trust and follow me. And then something actually happened to me in my own life with the people that I lead. It was actually after the murder of George Floyd. And so it was COVID. I was also going through some really hard things personally. I was a foster mom at the time. So anybody that's intersected with that, it's very hard. And nothing has taken me to my knees like foster care. And so that was going on. And then the murder of George Floyd, and our whole site was upside down, our whole organization. I had veterans who were very sick from COVID. So like everything at once. And I can remember there was a time where I was opening every staff meeting, trying to just check in on my team virtually. And I was just crying. It was like pouring, I couldn't get words out. And I would finally get myself together. And after every meeting, I'd be like, oh my God, they are losing hope in me for sure, right? And so then it was finally that meeting that we had to process, like the murder of George Floyd and how the climate was going on. There was suspected there would be riots downtown Las Vegas, which is where our location is. We want to talk about safety if that happens. All these things were going on. And of course, it was a very emotional meeting. And after that meeting, like 4 of my team texted me and said, like, you being so open with your emotion gave me the space to then also be honest with my emotions. I thought I had to keep it together, but then we're seeing you do it. And so Michelle, who you all met, and she knows we've talked about this before publicly, so it's okay that I share. She said to me, and remember, so at that time she'd worked with me for like 7 years. She's like, if I had to rate my psychological safety with you as my supervisor prior to that meeting, when you were so emotional, I would say it was probably a high 8, which is like pretty good, right? She's like, now after seeing you be so human, it's a 10. And I was literally shocked, you guys. I was like, your safety went up after you just saw me break down? She was like, because you were so human and you were so willing to be vulnerable, how you were really feeling. It gave me a safe space to do that. And that was like my biggest lesson to like, actually vulnerability is, so when she has me on the podcast, I would answer with a connector. It actually makes you connect more with people because you go like, so you are like me after all. I've had staff say like, Oh, you mean you have bad days? What? You need to be paying more attention. But people don't see you like that sometimes as a leader. They think, you got it all together and you never feel emotion. And so then they can't feel emotion around you. So it's a good point. It's a long story, Brandon, but it was like the biggest lesson I ever got to leadership was that actually vulnerability can actually connect you to someone. Whereas in my mind, the story I told myself is they were distancing themselves from me because they were, couldn't trust me because I was such an emotional wreck. Meanwhile, we're like, the whole world was an emotional wreck, right? In 2020. And I just had told myself a story about that. And so, yeah, I agree. Authentic connection can happen from vulnerability. And I do also look to leaders who are willing to show their vulnerability. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, I won't have a long story for everybody's, I promise. Who wants to go next? It's like possible on virtual to not be making eye contact so I don't call on you, but I do eventually just call on people if you don't. So whoever wants to go next, otherwise I'll start calling whoever next is on my screen. Okay, we're starting with A. So Amanda, it's you.
I'll introduce myself. I work for the Nevada Housing Coalition. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing, and Joanna just lets me crash these meetings so I can. I was not part of. Well, I was supposed to be part of the book club, but I ended up not being part of the book club because things have been really busy over here with us. But I do plan to read it at some point, and I interested. Joanna said great things about you, so I just wanted to hop on and learn from you. So.
Awesome. Well, you get a little preview because it's built off of the book, so you'll get it. Here's my hot tip. She has a Dare to Lead podcast, and some of my staff too are like, we do not read books. Quit trying to make us read a book. So I said, okay, well, listen to a couple podcast episodes, and we'll talk about those instead. Thanks, Amanda. Welcome. Glad to meet you. Okay, Coral, because we're going in alphabetical order. Coral, are you still there? Okay, we're gonna. Oh, hi.
Hi. So sorry. I had to change rooms. It was really loud in the other room that I was in. So I'm Coral Flores. I work for the Reno Housing Authority as a project manager in the development department. I'm pretty recent with the authority. It's been about 3 years. I was completely new to the affordable housing space and all of that. And then actually getting into real development, we've only really started that about a year ago. So the whole space is very new for me, but it's been really exciting and rewarding being a part of a community like the affordable housing community.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to what I found most useful from the Dare to Lead book is that, again, the vulnerability piece, but more so like being comfortable with not knowing what you don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But being aware, like, asking and being confident in asking and not knowing. And I think that's so new for me because before I got into affordable housing, I was very well versed in the industry that I was in, that I had done forever. So coming into a space that I didn't know like anything about, I wish I would have read that book 3 years ago.
Yeah, sometimes it can be an unwelcome feeling like, oh, now I'm coming into something uncertain, but she leans so much into curiosity and just being like open and not having to have all the answers. And I love that. It's a great example for all of us to do. Yeah. Mark, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Mark. I work with Opportunity Village and I oversee residential, behavioral, and nursing services at Opportunity Village. We just completed our first residential project a couple years ago, Betty's Village, and we're currently developing our second residential complex.
Oh my gosh, Betty's Village is gorgeous, by the way. So
thank
beautiful.
you. Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, congratulations.
So yeah, the book was eye-opening for me in the part of the vulnerability part, but it's kind of really understanding yourself so that you could lead other people.
Yes.
But the thing that kind of stuck out for me is because it's services for people, we have to definitely be creative as far as services in today's world. So it's being courageous and trying to think outside the box.
Yeah.
How we provide these services that benefits the individuals most.
Yeah, for sure. She does talk a lot about braving courage, right? Like finding other ways to do things, not being afraid to try different things. But yeah, you center yourself around what you know how to do and how you can, make that difference. That's awesome. Thanks, Mark. Joanna, you want to share?
Sure. Yeah, so I did read the book, but I did also listen a lot on audio. I gave this during our book club meeting where I was like, I might be missing some things because audiobooks isn't the best way for me to retain information. But I did find this book really impactful, as you did, Shalimar, and it also came kind of really at the right time for me. And just having like a lot going on in the transition with the coalition leadership right now too, thinking about my own future. And I think about leadership also not really even like in the kind of traditional organizational chart hierarchy way, but just even as just like being a good person.
So true.
Yeah, that's like how I think about it, and not just even in a work context, but just so many of the principles of that book really can apply in any relationship, any type of relationship that you have, actually. And it's great that we're talking about this kind of intimacy in the workplace, because I do really believe that that's the best way to create a better, healthier kind of workplace and community, and all that stuff bleeds out. But one of the things that maybe we haven't talked about as much, that because I agree with everything everybody has said already. But one of the things that really struck me on a more deeper personal level was the kind of the idea about boundaries being really crucial to positive relationships in the workplace. I think maybe you can relate, or some of the case managers, social services folks can relate, but I've found often there's a lot of talk about boundaries in social work because of the nature of the clients we work with. But I've actually had a really negative experience with people kind of using boundaries as an excuse not to build intimate relationships with our clients, or like not do the work for boundaries. And so I've always been like really pushed back on that boundary conversation in the context of building positive relationships with our clients. And I really liked the way the book framed the importance of boundaries, and how it supports clear communication and positive relationships, and setting expectations in conversation, which is a way I hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah, she even includes boundaries. So I don't know if you guys remember, but I think it was in this one where, it is Braving Trust. So it's an acronym, Braving, and the B actually stands for boundaries. And it's like you can actually build trust by having clear boundaries, where it's not like just the boundary in its most basic sense, which is like there's a line between us, but it's actually being able to frame what's okay and what's not okay is also very clear. And something that we say around here all the time, come from her book, Clear is Kind. You can still be kind, you can still have boundaries and still be very clear. In fact, all the time when you're more clear about boundaries, it is kind. Everybody knows what the expectation is. From there, when you have a boundary, then you have the fluidity work within that, right? It's like it actually gives you more fluidity when you know what the structure is. So yeah, I think that was a good point that she hits home for sure. I was going to say one thing about, you know what? I'll get to it. It's not a slide here, but something you prompted me. I remembered I did a slide, so I'll wait for that. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm about to share with you. We're not going to break down the book, but like I said, it is inspired by it. So thank you for sharing all of your takeaways. I feel like the more I talk about Dr. Brene Brown, the more she's likely to call. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, so what happened with me when I read the book actually was the thing I call the single most important thing I did as a leader recently that gave me fulfillment, more understanding, self-awareness about me, and which way I want to behave in the world, right? The single most. That's a pretty big charge. And it was when I named my values. So there is a chapter in your book, if you go back to it or open for the first time or whatnot, all about values. And I thought we were going to talk about like core values. So who on this call, just like raise your real hand or your electronic hand if you know what your company's core values are. Do you know your company's core values? Yeah, it's usually the majority. Okay, that's good. It's usually the majority of people when I ask that question say like, yeah, I know my company has values and I know what they are. I know our core values. So how many of you could say you know your own personal core values? The two most important. Joanna, awesome, good. So it's like equal in importance that you know what is the most important to you that drives you as in your values. But most people don't actually take the time to name them and then actually dig deeper to profess them and what those behaviors are that shows that you're really living into your value. So when I did the exercise, and she has the worksheet that you can pull off her website, I think she also, she does also outline how to name them, how to come down to 2. When I did it, I came to find that my 2 values are leadership and impact. I had never named, I of course knew I have values, but I never named what were my most important 2. There's something in the chat. Somebody, is that a question? I can't see. I can only see it beep in, but I can't see the chat.
Mark
Okay.
just let us know that he had to jump off.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks. So when I did that, why it gave me so much insight is kind of what I'm going to share with you. And so in case you did not do the values, worksheet, whether you did or not, the objectives of today is we are going to talk about how you will identify yours, most specifically your 2 most important ones. And if you raise your hand, so hopefully you've narrowed it down to 2 even, although we all have more than 2. I like what she said is that, well, if everything is equal in importance, how do you know what to profess as your most important? So we actually do narrow it down to 2. How to identify who you are at your best. That's part of the exercise as well. And then how you lead with impact, knowing what your values are. So that's kind of the objective today, okay? So what we're talking about as a value is her definition. It's the way of being or believing that we hold most important. So when you hear me talking about living into your values or professing them or your values behaviors, it means that we're really practicing them. It's how people see our values, how they're demonstrated, how they're evaluated, how you can make your values actually teachable to someone else so they understand more about you. And it's that we're being clear about what we believe and what we hold most important. So our thoughts, our actions, our beliefs should all line up with your values. Otherwise, you're actually operating sort of out of alignment with yourself. And there it comes back to the self-awareness, right? So for instance, hold on 1 second. My charger just unplugged. And I got the green bubble. And you cannot die now. I'm mentoring right now, excuse me. Okay, so it's back on. Our organizational values. We as an organization, so first I launched how each employee would find their personal values. We did that. All of our leadership team in Las Vegas did the worksheet. We all named our 2 most important values. It was so eye-opening to all of us that we could have better self-awareness and then connect with each other about our values that we then brought it to the rest of our staff. It took off in Las Vegas. We have a spreadsheet right now at this moment of every single one of our staff members and what their 2 most important values are. I have 85 staff. I could literally go to that spreadsheet anytime and go, and I know all of my leadership teams, like all the people who directly report to me, I know their 2 most important values. I take care to speak into their values because I know now what's most important to them. We did that. It was going so well that I decided to launch it to our national executive team. That ended up creating a movement. Now they know theirs, they know their staffs, they know all of the locations are starting to do this work. And so that was how we did it personally. And then we went to our organizational values. So as you raised your hand, we also knew we had core values. It was a list of 8 that we used to hang on the wall. And then in July 2022, I brought everybody to Las Vegas, our first executive conference in person since COVID. And we had it was all about culture and it was all about connection. And one of the biggest exercises that we did was look at our values that we hang on the wall. Are they really the most important values to us as an organization? And more importantly, what are the behaviors that we are going to teach our staff and ourselves and hold ourselves accountable to do to show that we as an organization really do stand for these values? So we went through that exercise and we actually narrowed it down to 4. Some of them weren't even on the original list. Came up with a summary statement, came up with behaviors for each one. Now it's no longer a list that we just hang on the wall. We actually live into our values because we've studied it more. We understand ourselves better and really what defines us. So in that same way as we did for our organization, we all as people can do by naming certain questions. I'm going to get to that next, because how will you narrow it down, right? There's a long list and probably some that aren't even on here of values. And how would you narrow it down to 2? Right? You know probably what you like, what you gravitate to. This exercise would have you circle the top 10 or 15, and then we say, keep going down to 2 until you get to the most important. And then you can use actually a filter of 3 questions that will help you narrow it down to 2. These are direct from her book. And I love this. I call it like the values filter. When you're stuck at, like mine was like stuck at 4 or 5, and how do I get down to 2, right? To really name what's most important, you ask yourself 3 questions. Does this value define me? Is this who I am at my best? And then 3, is this the lens I use to make our decisions? And when you can identify that the answer to those are those values that you've circled, you'll probably find that some of them ladder up to each other, right? So like, let's say love and connection were 2 of yours, because that's my 3 and 4. But actually, those are very related. So you might decide like, oh, that actually fits into this one. So anyway, I was able to narrow it down to 2, which any of us could. So these 3 questions are like what I say, this is the way. I've taken this idea to lots of people, different groups, and they've said, I just can't do it. I just can't narrow it down to 2. And I'm like, let's talk through that. Have you asked yourself the 3 questions? And usually when they do this, they're like, no, you're right. This one defines me more than really this one. This is like how I see the world, how I make decisions. And the concept here is that when you're living into your values, now you're actually living into your best self. That's why I say it was really the single most impactful thing that happened to me. I look back now at times where I felt like that was not a good decision. I did not feel like confident in that decision that I made. And sometimes you might even be able to think of when you're out of alignment, that feeling faster than you can think about when you are operating in it. For me, when I'm doing something where I feel like in my gut, like, I did not like how that went. I didn't like how I showed up in that meeting. What is that? And now I'm able to call back and I'm like, I know why. I was not like living into my values of like, I don't think I was the most impactful in that meeting. And I don't think I led well. It always for me will now come down to like, I'm out of alignment with my values. That's why it's not sitting well with me. For example, I have one of my leadership behaviors is that I speak up against hard things, right? Even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable, I do it. I was part of a Leadership Las Vegas program in 2021, and we were having a conversation about race and unconscious bias. And we're talking about diversity, really important topics. We're all in a big room. And at the end of it, somebody who's a dear friend of mine, it's not a conflict with her, but somebody said, okay, last comment, right, on this topic. And somebody raised their hand. She's like, well, I would like to say, I don't see anybody in here of color. I just see love and light. Now, I understand we know where she's going with that, right? We didn't say anything because then the facilitator says, okay, well, thank you. That was the last comment. We leave the room. To this day, it's now 2023, so 2 years later, I can still tell you the angle that I was sitting across from her, the way the sun was coming into the room, the metal of I can literally still feel how it feels in that room. And I'm like sweating when I think about it, even still now, like I was sweating in that moment. And I didn't know why I hadn't done this yet. Like, why does that bother me still? Like, so much later. And I realize now it's because if my value of leadership says that I speak up when I disagree or on hard things, and in that moment, I didn't get to say it, right? As a woman of color, by the way, not getting to say how I really believe, which is I actually do want you to see that I am a person of color. I know where she's going, right? We know that was all well intended, but I do actually want you to see me as a person of color, because if you don't, then you also are negating the fact that I have a story of immigration of the country that I'm so proud of, that and the grit that comes with this color, right? Like of how that I'm here now in America leading like this, like so much is like negated by not seeing who I really am, right? And that's part of who I am. And so like I would normally say that and take that teaching opportunity, right? And still to this day, I haven't said it. And so when I talk about it, it's like, and now I look back and I'm like, it's because I was out of alignment at that time, something I would normally do and they didn't do, that didn't line up with my values. That's where I know that really defines me, right? It's also, I'm not operating at my best when I'm not living into my values. That's why it's really the definition of who you are at your best. That second question, I love that. So I know I am at my best when I'm in a leadership role. Now, I don't have to lead everything. I also understand there's space for other people to lead. But, if I can take an opportunity, you will get better from me. If you ask me how to lead a certain thing or empower me to do that, you really get a lot from me more than if you ask me to just kind of be the quiet person in the background. It's just not the space that I do best in. So that's an idea about the 3. Do you guys remember this 3 questions from the book? For those of you guys who read it, I don't know if that part, yeah, you're nodding. Yeah, somehow this was the piece that really stood out the most to me. And it's really impactful to know who we are, because who we are as defined by our values is really how we lead. If you know your value is whatever, blank, growth, excellence, kindness, these are all of the values of my leadership team, you are better poised as a leader to operate as your best when you can follow that path. that if you know, like, I'll give you a great example, Michelle, and I'm glad you guys have met her because it gives me context to use her as the example. Her values are excellence and kindness. There is no coincidence. I tell her this all the time. She's also the person in charge of our data outcomes. All that ladders up to her role as the director of behavioral health. It is not a coincidence. I always tell her that in the US vet system, there's 12 locations. For 5 years running, our US Vets Las Vegas site has had the highest outcomes of any US Vets program in the country. And I tell her I tell everybody else is like, well, we want to win. Like, we want to come to the top. And I'm like, there's room at the top. The view is great. Y'all can, all the rest of the sites like Arizona, Hawaii, California, Texas, y'all can rise to the top too. And I said, but it is not a coincidence that the person in charge of our outcomes, her value is excellence. Like, there was one time, so 5 is the highest rating you can get based on your, like, how, and 1 month, because we do it monthly and then aggregate, 1 month we scored a 4.75. And she calls the data person and she's like, where did my 0.25 go? How did we get docked? What happened? And Lahela says, you do realize that most people call and ask how they can get to 4.75, right? You're calling because you're so worried about why you got 4.75. And that's just her excellence value on display. Like, she will always take the opportunity to learn, like, what was missing? How do we do better? How do we strive? What do we adjust? And we just love that. And then now that we know that that's her value, believe that anytime it's something that I really need somebody to focus on and put that excellence, whether it's data or whatever, I'm like, Michelle, I need you and your excellence value on this project, please, right? So that's how we use values when we know about that kind of stuff. When I'm looking for somebody to lead a training, a staff development training in place of me, Haley's value is growth. She loves to pour into people to help them grow. She loves to facilitate because it helps her grow. She's always a yes. If I say, like, Haley, you and your growth value, you ready to lead this project? Absolutely. I'm your girl. So same thing, Troy, our program manager, his value is faith. And there was a time that we were really working with, this is a good problem, right? I would have a staff member who I'm like, Troy, you need to leave. You cannot be at the site 12 hours a day. This is not good for you. We need to work on time management. Like, he's like, I feel like I need to be a part of every decision. I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. But you need to learn, like, some good boundaries with that because you're going to burn yourself out, right? Well, then I found out his value was faith. And I knew that on Thursday nights, he has a Bible study. He lets me use the Bible, so I'm not just like disclosing, but he has a Bible study. And there were a few weeks that he had to miss it because he had to be a part of every single meeting the clients were doing in the evening. And I'm like, you don't actually. That's what you have staff for. First of all, that's a whole nother lesson. But faith is your value. You have to align with your own value. If you're not going to this Bible study, that means that much to you. It took me one time to put it back to his value. He's like, you are so right. Like, why am I compromising my most important value when nothing's going to fall apart because there's actually people here to do that role in place of me? So, right, it was like definitely a leadership lesson of live into your value, answer that. I even use it, as you see, to sort of recalibrate, like when we need, redirection sometimes, or them to see things in a different way, because who we are is how we lead. All right. So when you can name and profess your values, the benefits that it can have on you, you can own your story. Yeah, I know.
Do you think your values can sometimes be detrimental to the process?
Yes.
I mean, like, and like, how do you correct for that? Or I don't know if there's any way to correct for that, or like, how do you work with people to tell them that, hey, your values aren't, like, they're great, but probably not needed right now, right here?
Oh, that's exactly what it is. It's all related to self-awareness, right? This doesn't mean that because I'm leadership, like, I'm like, okay, well, now I'm the leader of all the things, right? Like, and that is an example of detriment. Sometimes I'm like, did I have to say yes to everything? Like, just because leadership is perfect example. My daughter is now in kindergarten. Her teacher emails something the other day that's like, we're looking for the kindergarten mom to lead all the things. I'm doing this out loud in my office. Do not lead that. You are not the kindergarten mom. It's okay to say no. So you don't have to lead everything. You do not have time to be the kindergarten mom, like, right? So sometimes it's a detriment. You almost too much leading in, or sometimes I think where it also is a detriment, sometimes we could tend to box ourselves in. For instance, this is my value. I don't see leadership in you. I don't feel like we're working well together in this moment. You're not allowed to do that with your value. Use it against somebody else, or use it as a crutch to be like, you don't line up to how I define leadership because I know that's my value, right? Like, you still have to be aware of where's the place for it and the time for it, right? It's like, somebody's value is curiosity. And, there is a time when curiosity is always good, but if we're already in the implementation phase, the value of curiosity shows up and like, well, why are we even doing this? You're like, that was 10 questions ago. You can't do that now. Like, you can still be curious in your own way, but where's the time for it, right? Like, so still live into your values, but also know that means you're aware of when you turn it up, when you also have to dial it down, and just like your value doesn't have to change, know where it's appropriate here, right? So I think it is a really good point. We work on that too. In fact, sometimes we get so many examples of that where we're like, it's almost like a values monster. I'm like, where is the addendum in the book, Dr. Brene Brown, for when this happens? Like, and it's too much, right? So we have encountered that too. It's a great question. I had somebody once, I had them name, all of our national team name their values. Somebody said, man, it gave me so much clarity on how I'll make decisions in the future if this is my value. But also it made clear of, wow, that's why I decided that in the past. Because if that's so important to me, that's the lens that I see the world. No wonder I made some decisions that way, right?
Yeah.
You can understand yourself better. And then here's the great thing, even if you don't have the same values with somebody else, you can certainly connect more with them when you know what's most important to them. Like as leaders, it's almost like you get a gift. Like somebody tells you what is the two most important things about them. I would be remiss to not help you live into them as your leader, right? Or to just connect with you about them. So, somebody's about family. You should probably ask them how their family's doing every so often, right? It's important to them. That's a way of connecting. If somebody's value is, loyalty or whatever it might be, you can have conversations that stem from them. Or there have been aha moments. It's great. People across the country now send me emails of like, I saw somebody's value on display today and I told them about it. I said, I love that, right? Or somebody said, now I understand why that person, now that I know her value is freedom, I was totally stepping on her freedom when I told her the way she had to do it instead of asking her how she would like to do it, right? Like, first of all, that's like a 101. Like, we should be inclusive in those conversations, but it just was like a good lens for that person to be like, oh my God, if she values freedom, and I even let her speak on how she would like to do it herself, of course she felt diminished by me, right? So it's a way to understand somebody better and yourself better. Adam Grant is another author, and he suggests that like following your values is a necessity. When you know them, you got to live into them. You got to follow them, right? It's a compass. It points you towards a future purpose, and to be purposeful is so important in our lives, right? There's so many things that will distract us from what's important. To stay centered with who we really are and use it as a compass, you can do that through your values. And values provide lasting meaning versus just joy that might be short-lived, right? Like when I use this slide, I say like, there's a picture of donuts on this slide. I have never met a donut that I do not like. Donuts is my thing. And sometimes, I'm like stressed. I'm like out of alignment. Nothing's feeling good. I'm like, I just must need a donut, right? And then what happens? Like the next day, of course, you feel good in the moment you eat the donut. The next day you're like, yeah, stress, still there, right? So I teach my staff, like, go treat yourself, but also, is that going to give you like lasting meaning, right? Like what's going to give you more lasting meaning? And usually if you just think about like, how can I lead this? Or how can I have, in my case, lead or impact? Or, you might feel stagnant if you're not growing because your value is growth. A great example of a friend who, check my time, yeah, I'm okay. She left her nonprofit job to run for a state assembly. She did win, by the way. But in the process of campaigning, I'm like, so how are you going? This must be so exciting for you. You've always wanted to do this. She's like, I'm kind of bored. I'm like, I've never seen, like, if you see some person on a campaign trail, it does not seem boring. It seems like you're actually busy all the time. She's like, well, I'm busy all the time, but I'm not getting any joy from this part of the campaign. She's like, what is going on? Like, I'm worried. Like, maybe I don't want to do this. And I'm like, what are your values? I asked her the question. She's like, oh, I just had to do like an assessment for this. She's like, creativity is my number one value. And I'm like, oh, have you been able to be creative on the campaign trail? And so I didn't know this about campaigning, that like the Democratic Party actually is the one who defines like where you are, how many meetings you'll take on this day, exactly where you show up, right? It's a formula. It's very formulaic. You knock on this many doors, you call this many people, you show up to this many meetings. These are the caucus events that you're going to go to get exposure. So she came from a nonprofit where she only got to be creative. She founded this nonprofit, and she was doing a lot of creative work with students. And now she's like, oh my gosh, I haven't created anything the entire time I've been running for office. She's like, that's it. That's what's missing. And she's like, how did you know to ask me that question? I'm like, because Dr. Brene Brown says that you have to follow your values to find meaning. So I ended up telling her about, but you see like the difference of like, I can't figure out why I'm not feeling any happiness right now. And you go like, what's your value? Okay, how do you live into that? And she went. She was like, wow, that was really effective. And soon we saw her being much more creative with some things, and she was much happier. So it's an example of that. Because feeding our purpose by living into our values can really inspire performance, right? Like when you're gonna kind of breeze through these because these are an easy concept, but when you get a good feeling from something you do, which you can, if it's something related to your value, you're gonna want to do more of it. So even when your tank is empty, right, you can keep going if you're sprinkling time in there to do something that's really purposeful for you. We all know that, right? It's a pretty basic concept. And if you're confused of like, what could I do right now? I would challenge you, what are the most important values to you? And how can you live into those values to get purpose from them? Even if, sometimes people feel like, well, my value is travel, but I can't leave right now. I get that. That's true. You can't just drop what you're doing to live into your values, right? Like, right? There's times that you can turn it on, turn it off, use it as much as you want, but how do you feel it? Can you plan travel and just even getting centered around something that's really meaningful for you, even if you can't go right now? The act of planning it will refill your tank a little bit, right? So those are some examples of how you find purpose and meaning in your activities. Then you can ask yourselves, and this is for you all, once you've named your values, help you decide how you'd like to make impact. So we talked about you all have very diverse roles, right? And you're a part of one court, which is amazing. And from direct service all the way to financing, right? How do you want to make impact in the role that you have in this space? Because that will look different for each of us, right? And it's not necessarily only difference that you'll make according to your title, but even how do you show up in your position with your values? How do we get to see those values on display? And when you can live and lead like that, you can consider your connection more to yourself, to your purpose, connect with others. Then you start to ask yourself, what can I immerse myself in? If I know my value is growth, how am I actively growing, right? Some people say, does it mean for those of us who read? No wonder I love leadership books so much. This is like, I've always loved leadership books. I never named my value to be leadership until 2 years ago. No wonder I always gravitate to these topics. Even the Erin Brockovich thing, I'm like, no wonder I love that movie. She was like such a leader in her space, and she made so much impact for people. Like, it's not a coincidence, right? So what can you immerse yourself in that helps you hone in more on what your value is? Where I was going with that. What and who do you care to impact, right? How do you want to use your values to impact other people? Who's within your sphere of influence that can feel the impact of your values? And then I love this. One of my mentors, he said, he's always a drop the mic guy, General Barry from the Nevada National Guard. He said, we got to teach people, good leaders not only have the right skill set and the right tool set, they also have the right mindset and the right heart set. And for me, values lies in that heart set and that mindset. When you're centering yourself about what your heart feels really purposeful about, your heart is on fire because you're so passionate about it, then you use the mindset of like how you live into your values. Those things are equally, if not more important than the hard skills that anybody can teach you. So we say this a lot now, like when we're hiring at US Vets, it's not good enough that you can write a dynamic case note. I mean, Brandon will tell you it's very important. Like we audit those kind of things. But also, do you have the right mindset to be walking alongside our clients, right? Because you can not only be strong in the administrative side, for example, which would lie more within tool set and skill set. You got to have the right mindset and the right heart set to do this type of work as well. And you can really dial into what your heart set and what your mindset is when you dial into what values you hold, right? That's basically how we've adapted it here. So this is the wrap up already. We identified the 3 questions that'll help you identify your values, right? And then in doing that, you'll come to learn that you are at your best when you can live into those values. And then you can decide, once you know what your values are, how you want to lead with impact, where you want to make impact in the world. Okay, so check. We're going to say check. And Joanna, if you want, I have the worksheet so that you guys don't have to pull your books out. If you guys want to do that and ask yourself the 3 questions to name your 2 most important values, or just validate that the ones that you know are really the most important too. Okay, so I can send that to you. So this was my action. I would say, do it. Do the worksheet. Name and profess your values. Tell people what your values are. We hang them on the wall here so that we can help people live into it. And then just do that some reflection. How do I want to make impact in the world? How am I currently finding meaning from what I'm doing. Okay. And then here's my contact info if you guys want to screenshot it. Feel free. And then Ina, if you want to ask me about affordable housing or housing projects, I know we didn't talk about that. I do love a conversation. So, feel free to connect with me or about this or about whatever. I want to make sure I do that. I know I think I use up all the time, but I should have left time for questions.
No, that's okay, because we'll have the mentor
That's right.
office hours in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Good.
And I think it would be great if you could send me these slides so that I can send them out also for the folks
Sure.
that you will be watching the recording, and that worksheet, and maybe the cohorts will devise some questions around this, but also that could also be a great time to just talk about the work of US Vets and housing in general too, because that's
We
the
can
whole
do it
point
that
of
way
this,
too.
right?
Yeah. Okay, definitely. I will
So
send you those two things, and then see you at office hours. But hopefully this sparks some thought about your values and the impact you want to make. Okay, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Shalimar. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and I'm really looking forward to chatting again in a couple of weeks once people have had some time to think through and digest. And everybody else, send that follow-up email tomorrow with those resources, and the usual kind of tidbits and all that stuff.
Perfect. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Nice to
And I
meet
will
you.
talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
afternoon.
Joanna,
Thank
for the
you.
invite.